Commission meeting for Tuesday, September 20th.
This meeting is being recorded.
Oops, I'll start over.
We're all excited, but go ahead.
Okay. Welcome, everybody, to tonight's City of Tumwater Planning Commission meeting for Tuesday, September 24th, 2024, just after 7 p.m., and the meeting is called to order. I'll do our roll call first. Commissioner Edwards.
Here.
Great. Commissioner Kirkpatrick.
Here.
Commissioner Kotek is excused. Commissioner Polson. Here. Great. Commissioner Perez is excused. Commissioner Staff.
Here.
Great. Commissioner Tobias is excused, and Commissioner Varela is excused, and me, Commissioner Robbins. So we do have a quorum, and we can move forward. Does anybody have any changes to our agenda tonight? Okay. I'm not hearing any. I'll move forward. Do we have any commissioner reports tonight? Or did we lose?
No, sorry, it's fine.
Okay, we're good. All right. There's just glare on the. Oh, I think that's just the.
Right. Sorry. Okay.
Are there any commissioners' reports? All right. We'll move on. Brad, manager's report?
Yeah.
We're way out there with 20,204 planning commission. I'm making a joke about the numerical typo on the.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
Good. There was a typo. Was it, okay. Like my salary or something?
Yeah.
Actually.
20,204, quite a ways in the future, but.
Oh, okay. Well, I was a bit excited, and I was thinking of the future. Let's see. Quickly, Erica thanks you for your behavior 2 weeks ago. She said you guys did very well. She's now on a cruise, and hopefully she'll come back. So, we'll see how that goes.
I think we voted a raise for her, though.
I'm sure she's done a lot of stuff. I've been out of the office for 3 weeks, and it feels like longer. So,
great flus.
if at any point I sort of drift off or forget things, I'm recovering and I'm suffering from the after effects of the stuff. So if I have a senior moment, it is a senior moment. Good news, the housing displacement study is moving forward. We had a really good meeting with a consultant yesterday. That work will be informing our update for the housing element. We'll be getting into the housing allocation stuff, which is also really important because that allows us to kick off the work on the land use element of the housing element. We'll explain in more detail. We are doing a lot of work on the HCP that hopefully in probably about a month's time, we'll be able to give you an update on our progress with that. But I think we're going to have some big decisions coming up on that. I think that covers the big issues for now. Oh, the food service plan work is going to be starting on Thursday. We have a consultant, excuse me, we talked about the food security or food plan for the city, and we have a consultant on board who we're going to meet with on Thursday. I expect we'll be having some material for you to look at, hopefully by the end of the year, as we're starting that particular process. This was something the Planning Commission and the Council talked about a lot last year. It took us a little bit of time to sort of ratchet up what we could do, but fortunately we have somebody going to be helping with that process. So it'll be a change of pace from all the other stuff we've been talking about for the past year.
Yeah, good. Cool. Thanks, Brad. Do we have anybody from the public online? There's nobody here in the room.
There's nobody online, and I didn't get any messages or emails about the meeting.
Okay. Joke. Thanks. Well then, let's move on to item number 7, the 2025 Comprehensive Plan Periodic Update, the Housing Allocation and Land Capacity Analysis.
I'm going to go ahead and share screen for the presentation, if I can find it. So, Grace, can you see the presentation?
I can, thank you.
Okay. So this presentation is very professional looking. It was produced by Thurston Regional Planning Council, so just any pointers and anything, just talk to them about how our presentations could reflect this. The good news is they put in a lot of great work in getting all this information together, and I really want to shout out their staff for that. They had to deal with some kind of difficult issues that we hadn't anticipated when we started this process, and they were able to sort it out. It was a process that requires a lot of coordination between the county and all the jurisdictions, which can be difficult at times, but again, we were lucked out by having, first of all, planning directors willing to talk to each other. So first point, but more importantly, we had a lot of good conversations. We didn't have any real issues between us trying to figure this out, which is always grateful for that. But I'll walk you through what we have here. So, pardon me, a little background for, I think we've touched on this before. House Bill 1220 included a lot of new requirements for the housing element. First of all, that we have to plan for and accommodate housing affordable to all economic segments of the population, which is above and beyond what our previous mandate had been, which is basically, here's a housing allocation, go for it. We have to identify a sufficient capacity of land for housing for all those economic segments as well. So that's kind of a key point as we're sort of talking through these numbers and what they mean and how they're going to play out in the work we're going to be doing coming up as part of this process. So again, we were very fortunate starting for us in 1998, at City Council's direction. We really sort of plunged into the whole affordable housing homelessness issue and really laid a lot of the foundational groundwork of the stuff we're talking about now. So things like the Housing Action Plan came out of that process. It was a joint process between the three jurisdictions, Lacey, Olympia, and Tumwater. We've been working closely with the Regional Housing Council on the Homeless Crisis Response Plan and a variety of other regional things that we're dealing with on the homelessness and the very bottom of the affordable housing spectrum. We've touched briefly on the countywide planning policies. We're not going to really update those until after we're done with the process. From 2016, there's a couple minor changes that we're making, but we just didn't have the bandwidth to do that on the county level before we started this process. But we have been updating our comprehensive plans to reflect a lot of the things in the Housing Action Plan, as well as a lot of the text amendments that we've been making, doing our middle housing light version. So we're kind of on the way to addressing a lot of this stuff. So what we're required by the state to plan for is a whole slew of income categories that we didn't have to address before. The first deals with emergency shelter and emergency housing. They're related to, first of all, getting people off the streets and into something immediately. One is sort of like the overnight instant thing. The next one is, let's have a little bit more extended stay. It's not a permanent thing, but it's enough to keep them out of the shelters and into the next stage. As part of our discussions last year, the Planning Commission forwarded a recommendation to the council to change how we deal with emergency housing and shelter. Basically, state law has changed to say that if we have hotels or multifamily in particular residential zones, we need to allow for emergency housing, transitional housing, and all those kinds of other things in those zones. So for us, fortunately, we've completed all that work. So we're already ahead of the game in terms of meeting the state requirements on that. What that means, and this is a theme I'll be repeating as we go through this process, is that while we allow for particular uses to be built, we don't build them ourselves. And so it requires, especially on this end of the income spectrum, a lot of coordination with public agencies, a lot of coordination with state and federal funding sources and nonprofits to build and manage those kinds of housing units. So that's another whole level. So it's one thing to say, yes, we allow for it. Yes, our plan is supportive of it. It's the next big step to say, how are we going to pay for it? How are we going to pay to manage those things over time? In addition to that, we have to address both extremely low income housing, which is 0 to 30% AMI. AMI in Thurston County is about $102,000 per household. right now, so to give you an idea of what that is about, a little about $30,000 or so. As part of that is also permanent supportive housing, which is the next level up from emergency housing, which is housing that has wraparound services, that has a big public subsidy that won't go away through the course of its lifetime. The next level, very low income, 30 to 50%, then low income, 50 to 80, and then moderate, 80 to 100 and 100 to 120. Our housing spectrum right now, we cover the middle very well. It's the ends that we're missing in terms of providing the housing matching income. That's true for both the under 80% as well as the over 120%. So while we don't talk about the 120% as much in this because we're not required to, just keep in mind that's part of another part of the housing discussion that we're having. So this is the current housing need in 2020. This is the current supply. You can see the breakdown. We have a fairly strong 50 to 80%. That's a mixture of middle housing and multifamily. We have a little bit of 30 to 80%. We have a very small amount of permanent supportive housing. And then we have a relatively small amount of emergency housing relative to the need in the community. What this translates into is over from 2020 to 2045, we're going to need another 55,000 approximately number of housing units to meet the state allocation. Now, the 54,356 is the state allocation to Thurston County. All the counties that are planning under GMA received an allocation from the state to that they have to plan for, and that's the total amount breakout. We don't have a say in that number. That's just a given. We just go in from that number and plan from that. So the interesting thing again to look at is if we look at all the things in orange, we've got some substantial deficits under 80% in the permanent supportive housing and so forth to try to address in the next 20 years. We're doing okay, as I said, in the 80 to 120%, and we have this interesting, larger end of the over 120% that if we deal with, great, but we don't have to actively plan for it. Now, again, this is the countywide housing across all of the jurisdictions. Part of the process for us was we worked with TRPC in Thurston County, Olympia, Lacey, Yelm, and Tenino, and Rainier and Bucota were represented by the county. We had to identify the housing need for each of those AMI groups for each jurisdiction. So taking that larger 50,000 and breaking it out to each, we had then in turn had to do a land capacity analysis to say, do we have enough land to do what we say we need to do in terms of providing for the housing? So we'll start first with just the identifying the housing need and how that was allocated across the jurisdictions. So the House bill provided a general outline of the process that we could follow. The Commerce guidance is also available if you'd like to look at the 80-page document. It's posted on our comprehensive plan website. The general outline of how this process would be that it was emphasized it should be multi-jurisdictional and collaborative. We were very fortunate, as I mentioned, that we had a good group of people willing to talk to each other, which is not always the case. And all of the need through each of the jurisdictions has to equal that total county need. We can't have any leftovers. And we also have to come to some agreement to have TRPC accept the allocation at the end of the process. So where we are right now in the process is they've issued their final report. I'm pretty confident the numbers are what they are. TRPC has to go out and approve that as part of their process. So in my mind, it's a formality, but that's something that'll be happening in October and November. So we'll be officially done with the process, hopefully by the end of November. So this is the current supply across each of the jurisdictions. This is the 0 to 80%. This does not include the emergency housing allocation. So that will come in and out of the discussion. Just be aware that that's always there, but not necessarily part of these numbers. You'll note that the housing supplies for Lacey and Olympia obviously are pretty high, as well as the rural lands, which includes all the UGAs for the cities, as well as those areas that are outside of the UGAs in the county. We're sort of about where we should be. We're about less than half of what Olympia and Lacey is, and Yelm is about a third of what ours is. Now, this is what the need comes out to for future low-income housing. Now, what is missing from this number is a couple things. I don't think this number, I think, reflects just the number for within the city of Tumwater. It doesn't reflect the allocation to the UGA, which would have been as part of the rural numbers. So I think something's missing from the slide. But if you read the report, all that is spelled out in detail. You'll notice that Yelm's housing need is almost equal to ours. It's kind of no surprise there. At the beginning of the growth spurt process, we're kind of in the middle. Lacey and Olympia are kind of slowly built out. So the proportional numbers, that's how this kind of works out as part of the process. So the land capacity analysis then turned it around and said, okay, is there enough land for 20 years of population growth? And they looked at it in a few different ways. First of all, they started with the buildable lands report, which was last really worked on in 2019 and updated and approved in 21 to say, here's our base. Now, enough has happened in that time that, number one, we didn't want to go into the process of doing that whole process again because it's a very lengthy process, but it wasn't current. And so we had to make some tweaks to it to get it up to speed, and the staff report explains some of those things that were done for that. So answering two questions, is there enough land to accommodate the 20-year low-income housing need? That's the under 80% number. And is land, both in terms of zoning and development regulations, a barrier to low-income housing development? So two different questions. Do we have enough land? And two, do we have issues with our code or policies that prevent us from getting that kind of density in the areas that we're expecting to have? So, general findings from the report. There were no deficits found in the Lacey, Olympia, or Tumwater areas. However, our deficit is like 30 units. So in my mind, we're not scot-free because we have a lot of other complications to deal with. There were deficits found in Tenino, Yelm, and Grand Mound. So they're going to have to do some very explicit things to address that issue in terms of changes to their development code and allowing greater uses in that. So the general picture is we've got enough land in the city as is currently zoned the way it is. We have enough uses allowed in the proper areas to allow for the development of multifamily and so forth in those, for those different income groups. The trick is we also have something called a gopher, and that has, we've accounted for that as part of this discussion by taking out 300 acres off the top from the land capacity analysis, knowing that it's really not going to happen, development's not going to happen on these greenfield areas. I don't think it takes out enough, given what I think the impacts are, since we're ground zero for one of the subspecies.
Meaning that more will have to be set aside as not buildable on account of the pocket gopher? Okay.
Yeah, more conservation. The issue is the species has some concentrated areas which are prime areas for the species to be, and we just happen to have 3 out of those 4 areas that have been identified. So.
You already broke in.
Okay, go ahead.
How does the sewer system fit into this? In other words, yes, there's land available, but is it usable?
Yeah.
Is that question asked?
It's sort of built into some of the background on the buildable lands, but it's not explicit. So for our purposes, and one of the things that we've identified as part of our housing action plan is we've identifying areas that the city would likely need to do some investment of its own to sort of push the development forward, because there's probably not enough mass, or it's too expensive for one landowner to start the process to get everything going. So there are areas that I think we're gonna have to include as part of the comprehensive plan as one of our action items, and include in our capital facilities plan to address part of that. But you're correct. It's not a capacity issue downstream, it's a how do we get the lift stations and the service out to particular areas. So I'm going to skip ahead to ours, get back to ours. Excuse me. If you'd like to talk amongst yourselves as I try to figure out how to.
Are you using the back arrow?
Oh, yes, there we go. Okay, thank you. So this is the breakdown for Tumwater for how our housing looks for the under 20%, 120%. So keep in mind, what's missing from this is the over 120% that we don't officially have to plan for, that will supposedly just happen. So the unit counts are probably less than the 9,000 plus that we anticipate we have to allocate as part of this process. So first and most important part of this is this includes both the city and our urban growth area. When we looked at the numbers that were coming up as part of the housing allocation process, doing the paper exercise of allocating the numbers to the UGAs made sense. You know, it literally was just tables and paper pushing the numbers around. But in a practical matter, when we're planning for land use and supporting transit and compact urban development and all these other things, it doesn't make sense to do a paper exercise to send all the UGA housing units to the far reaches of the area, when truly it makes more sense to sort of look at how can we bring it in and concentrate it. So what these numbers reflect are both the numbers from the city proper as it within the current city limits, as well as all of our UGA. That includes all that land along Black Lake, all the land in the south, and so forth. So our planning will include, our housing element will include planning for that entire area. Because we have operate under joint plans with the Thurston County for our UGAs, we're actually in pretty decent shape if we focus on, use our housing element as that tool. Because the joint plans up to this point have been literally adopt the city's housing element, no changes. The only changes and only tweaks that are typically made are on the land use element. So all of the other comprehensive plan element stuff that we do, from transportation to housing, conservation, et cetera, is pretty much the same in the joint plan it is in the city. So we're kind of set up to help to work through that as part of this process. So what this table breaks out is, as we talked about, the extremely low income, we have a housing need of 723 for the permanent supportive housing. That means we have to include action items and things within the plan to support others developing that property. That means on our part, probably identifying potential funding sources or strategies for us to identify funding sources and all the supports that are needed to create that kind of housing. I don't think, a couple caveats, I don't think new housing is going to be built that is going to be affordable to anybody under 80% AMI. It's just not a realistic scenario. Yelm is currently getting projects in that are building ADUs as part of a brand new subdivision, and they're renting out for $2,300 a month. So, and ADUs supposedly are the panacea to affordable housing. I don't see that. The cost of building a new house, the cost of building a new project is such, I don't think you can get the return in such a way that you can actually build it on the private market without huge subsidies. What that means in my mind is we're really going to have to build a lot of other housing that's going to be market rate, that is just going to open up older existing housing for the under 80%. I don't know how the state frankly thinks that's gonna occur anywhere. But, you know, we can show by the numbers, yeah, we can make it work, we can do all this stuff, but yeah, the reality is we're not gonna be building. Just, the market's not there to do that. Unless, of course, we have a giant recession, everything crashes, and then we're fine. Look, it's been, it's been a few years, it's coming around. I mean, I've been through 3 of these so far, so it's not.
Rain clouds aren't here yet, Brad.
I know, but
It's a bright, beautiful.
with every bright, beautiful day, there's always a deep, dark night. So what,
Cloud Brad coming over.
what happens when you grow old? You just have to
Really noted.
So as you can see, again, this is the need total for the under 80%. This is the total capacity as calculated using that process that's outlined in the memo. We've got a 35 unit surplus, which in theory means we're good. We don't have to do anything. What it means in practicality is the under 80%, according to Commerce guidance, the kinds of units that are affordable for that are multifamily, 5 units and more, ADUs in their mind, you know, duplexes, fourplexes, triplexes, which is something that we're working on as part of the middle housing work, as part of the comprehensive plan update to expand in further areas. But that's really going to be a much bigger push than it has been in the past to see that kind of development occur. We have only seen it flip from single family as a dominant number of units coming in to multifamily in the past couple of years. So really, you know, it's going to be a pretty big sea change to do that, to get enough units that could be affordable. Any questions about any of this?
So that 300 acres, if that goes up to 400, Pocket Gopher, that 35 surplus is gone.
Pretty much, yeah. Yep.
Do we know what mechanism they used for, like, for determining the areas for the gopher? Like, was it one of the reports that came out of, I thought TRPC did a report on it?
So TRPC, when they did the original buildable lands report, included a factor for the gopher and conservation lands. However, that factor was really based on rural lands, meaning that if I've got a 10-acre parcel, I'm going to assume that 4 acres are going to be gopher habitat. That comes off the top. That wasn't applied within the urban area, and really doesn't apply to us because, you know, we've got a whole range of lot sizes and so forth. And if we have development, it's going to be 100%. It's probably not going to be a portion. Like, you can't tuck a development into one corner as easily in the city as you can out in the county. So the numbers that we came up with were based on our work on our habitat conservation plan. We know we have a potential, and this is from previous work that we have said that we would need probably about 1,600 acres of gopher soil habitat to be developed in order to meet our current comprehensive plan goals and everything that's been laid out by the state. And so we know our total impact, we know our total amount of gopher soils within the city. The absence or presence of gophers is nice, but it's not part of the equation based on how the HCP is structured. It's loss of land for habitat, not physically gopher land that's lost. So we know over the next 20 years, our impact is going to be about 1,600 acres. We know from the Mazama Pocket Gopher Recovery Plan that the service published last year that they envision these 250 to 500 acre individual recovery reserve areas, 3 of which are entirely within the city, 1 of which was mostly within the city. So just doing the math on our part and just trying to figure out what's likely to happen, we know that probably about half of that 1,600 acres is going to be within the city, that we're going to need to figure out conservation land within the city in order for the service to approve the ACP. So that's where we get the numbers from. Now, we didn't go full bore, my God, we need 800 acres taken off the books immediately because, well, we didn't want to feel that bad. So we decided to feel just a little bit bad and just go with an area that we're really sure is going to be conservation area and work from there. So in the back of our minds, however, we are thinking it's not going to be enough. And so we've got to figure out other ways to do this.
Ed, what's the time frame of the projections for need and usable land and so on? Are we looking at the full 20 years? So this is gonna, supposedly this will be, these same numbers will be in play for the next 20 years?
Yes. Now, built into 1220 is a 5-year check-in to see how we're doing against the numbers, make adjustments as needed. So this is what we're starting from, but we're going to have a few check-ins before the end of the 20 years to make changes and so forth. So I think we'll be tweaking those as we go.
There could be tweaks or there could be major adjustments needed. Not just with the gopher, but actual.
Yeah. Actual, excuse me, on two different fronts. One, sort of tracking how actually development is occurring, seeing how fast absorption is happening, again, recession or not, there's going to be changes over time with that number. But also whether or not the implementation actions that we have laid out to get to these numbers are actually producing results. And so I'm thinking likely that the numbers themselves won't be varying that much, but the mechanisms that we have to try to get to the numbers will be things that we'll be tweaking and working on.
That's sort of my next question, kind of what's the feedback mechanism to the legislature that triggers, public subsidy of the needed housing?
Two very important, distinct questions. One, they're not linked. One is a ongoing legislative budgetary discussion we have with the state and the federal government about their funding for these kinds of services. Now, the state has really upped the amount that they're sending out to provide for this housing versus previous years. I'm not saying they're not doing a greater share. What we're finding, however, is it really it's making a little bit of a difference, but it's not addressing everything. And I'm just talking about the homeless side of things in terms of the projects that are coming online, the unit counts, what we know from homeless counts have been in relation to that and all that. We're still have much higher need than we actually have potential units coming on. So, if the homeless side of this is probably getting the bigger focus and more of the subsidies, it's a bigger gap when it comes to the affordable, if you're not homeless, 0 to 30, 0 to 50 side of things.
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of wondering, it's looking like that just market forces are not going to deliver the needed units across the spectrum. Maybe in the 100 or 120 or over, they will, because that pencils out for developers. But for the rest, that doesn't look like it's going to actually meet the target.
Yeah, and just from our experience in dealing with things to encourage more low-income housing, permanent low-income housing, by reducing fees, impact fees and connection charges and things, those are kind of the levers we've got where we can reduce, our fee impact. What that means, it doesn't mean it reduces the need for the money, it just takes it away from those particular projects and puts it on the rest of the property owners to deal with that. We're not seeing a lot of movement, even with 50% off or whatever we're currently doing for affordable housing projects. There's a whole much more that is needed above and beyond what we can do with our levers. And we do have a portion of our sales tax that goes to affordable housing. It is probably enough to maybe to do a quarter of a project a year. By quarter, I mean 25 units out of 100 unit So it's not it deals with the construction side. It doesn't deal with the ongoing wraparound services that are needed side, which is, I think, almost equal in terms of your financial outlay. If you're going to build something, make sure you've got enough funds to maintain it as the condition you want to maintain it and provide people with services to the level that they need it, so it functions the way you want it to.
Let me just pause and because I don't have Grace on the screen, Commissioner Edwards, if you have a question, I want to say be sure and speak up because we can't necessarily see a hand raised right now.
Perfect, thank you.
Great. All right, go. You can go on ahead.
So that pretty much covered the presentation and where we're at in terms of our need. Couple things that we're looking forward to is, number one, we've got the first draft of some code changes from SCJ to deal with middle housing that came across last week. We're in the process of reviewing that. We're going to be tweaking that a bit. Probably have something to show you, hopefully by the end of the year. So you can see where the development code side of things is going in terms of range of uses and other mechanisms that we're going to do. It is one part of a much larger code update process. So it's driven again by state requirements, but we have a bunch of other things we're going to be doing in addition to that. So we'll show you part of that.
Great. Oh, Commissioner Kirkpatrick.
Are they working on a 1,000 square foot ADU standard design?
Yeah, thank you. We are currently working with Lacey and Olympia on updating our interlocal agreement and to update the current set of plans that we have, which are under 800 square feet. We have developed the 3 jurisdictions sets of plans for 4 different types of ADUs, from studio to 2 bedrooms, even 2 stories that are 800 square feet and less. With the updates to the building code earlier this year, we need to update those plans to reflect the energy code changes. The purpose of the plans, again, are basically building ready plans. So if you come across, say, I want to build an ADU, we have the plan sets available. We talk to you through the process. You know, you sign an agreement to say, yes, I'll use these plans. The plans are pre-approved, so there's nothing we have to do to do anything further. The cool thing is the architect that we've been working with has also designed them so you basically can swap out the exteriors and everything else. So it's not a single look kind of thing. There's ways to tweak it to whatever. So we're in the process of trying to get that updated, hopefully get the plans worked on this fall. So those will be updated. So it goes up to the 1,000 square foot, which is now the new minimum by the state for ADUs for size.
Mr. Paulson.
Assuming that there's the only review that you guys would actually need to do would be site plan to ensure that's no critical areas.
Yep. Yeah. So essentially, it would be the box is done. We just have to figure out how you access it, get water and sewer to it, and then you're good.
Yeah, Lacey implemented that, a couple of years ago?
Yeah.
How has that been going for them?
It's been going pretty well. Again, it's so expensive to build stick-built ADUs, especially in developed neighborhoods, and it's primarily a cost of labor because you got to get everything back into the backyard. So really, it hasn't penciled out, I think, on the cost side. They have been seeing a slight uptick, but it's not like the panacea. It's like, okay, we can get another 10 to maybe 20 units a year if we're lucky out of it. But it's just like when we started this whole process, we knew we couldn't have one thing that would do everything. So we decided, let's just do everything because we'll get hopefully, enough of the bang from all these other little things that we're doing. So this is just another one of those things.
So the elevation basically changes between the different ADUs.
Mm-hmm. Yep, but so the window placement's the same, the door placement's the same, but how you put what kind of siding you put on, what kind of things are, it's easily switched out.
Commissioner Kirkpatrick.
A thought in mind of capability of adding two ADUs, if there's enough space. Is somebody looking at whether the existing sewer system can handle those? We're talking about plopping two more bathrooms at least, maybe four, onto a lot. The question, and we built a sewer system for 200 or 300 homes, single-family homes in that area. Is somebody physically looking at whether that's possible without expanding the sewer system where it exists today?
Yeah, so there's two parts to that. One is, again, when we sized and built or had the sewer system built as part of various projects coming across, we did so with a whole level of assumptions in terms of density of growth and the maximum and everything else that we'd have to do for the overall system. And in particular areas, certain things were sized in a particular area based on the maximum number of density of units. What has come across from the state now is with the ADUs, more ADUs being basically required to be allowed, as well as some other additional units allowed on a single parcel that we haven't had to deal with in the past. And in cases where they provide ADUs up to 4, we're in the process of trying to figure out how the hell do we figure out the capital facilities, transportation, and all this other side of things that is now a much more complicated conversation than it was when we just say, if we've got 11 units per acre coming on at maximum density, we need X. Now it's 11 units plus, well, if you can do 2 units on an existing parcel that's out there, plus the ADU, plus this, you know, it's not necessarily we expect the max to be built out, but it is going to occur, and it's going to occur over time. And to get to your question, yes, that's what we're trying to figure out right now. No, we don't have an answer, by the way.
I just picture that, I think the way we do it now is that a developer comes in, builds a couple hundred homes, and the cost of bringing side sewer system to that developer is paid for by the developer. So but we aren't going to be able to do that with ADUs. You're not going to be able to charge the person who's building the ADU cost of bringing more sewer capability. That's going to have to be, the money's going to have to come from somewhere else.
Yeah, and so there's a couple parts to that. One is the connection charges and so forth, which could be fairly expensive when you're building just a house by itself, which is one way of trying to capture that is. The other thing is we're also really trying to figure out, because ADUs are no longer required to be under one ownership as the primary house, they could be separate ownerships. Having the same water connection, the same sewer connection, and so forth creates a whole bunch of headaches downstream that we have to try to figure out. It also adds a lot of cost because no longer can you just do a simple split. You actually have to run separate lines and everything else. And so, yeah, we're still trying to figure out how that actually will work.
Brad, I wonder if you could, I don't remember exactly what chart it was, but, maybe it was that chart with the blue and the orange, early on, or maybe it was the one, table 16 in the, appendix, for Tumwater and the zone categories and the needs for each category. And you said something interesting. I think I agree with it, that the ADUs are going to kind of come in, you know, bit by bit, you know, one at a time as any landowner decides to do that. Versus, you know, a larger development providing, you know, greater numbers. And I'm just wondering, you know, kind of that break point of where we should be most focusing to address the need we have.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I realize we have to allow, as you know, directed from the legislature, that we have to allow the ADUs, but it just seems like that's going to be just in small increments that, we really should be focusing on where we will get bigger bang.
And that's been kind of our thoughts in the background since the state has been offering all these amendments. I mean, when you're legislating on the state level, the size of an ADU and everything, that's like,
Yeah.
we're gonna do that, let's just do it across the board. So we don't have to, have these extensive regulations dealing with ADUs that if we're lucky, we get 10 a year, it's just not worth the effort. When you can put so much more into a single multifamily project and get so many more units. And maybe even get the level of transit use and everything else that you're really trying to get as part of these other things, so.
I'll just throw one more out there. I think we're having a good conversation. Legislature has decided the minimum size for an ADU is 1,000 square feet. But we can build, apartments with considerably less than that. Isn't that right? They haven't done that to apartments yet.
No,
So they're almost pushing you out of the ADUs into building more apartments, where you can actually, I lived in a 2-bedroom, 650 square foot apartment, and I was quite comfortable.
Right.
So easily get a lot more units, and even 3-story buildings, you can ever hope for, and ADUs at 1,000 square.
The other issue, and you're correct, that multifamily gives you a little more flexibility. Even the quote-unquote affordable apartments that are being built now are probably sized twice 600 unit square footage that you're getting, on average. So I think we're sort of, on one hand, we've got the market driving sizes of apartments and things larger. So we're not necessarily getting, the more units in the particular area that we might be able to get, which leads to, and also affordability issues, because you're gonna have to charge more for the larger square footage and all this other stuff. So until we start seeing smaller apartment sizes, there's a lot of stuff that we need to figure out. And this is probably where it comes to, if we wanna have affordable housing, we need to figure out how to make it work with square footage sizes and everything else that truly are affordable, rather than $1,600 to $1,800 per month.
Commissioner Stan?
Curious, based off that, are there builders out there focusing on that right now? Instead of, I agree with Terry completely, is 2-bedroom, 650 square foot apartment. You don't see that really. You see 1,100, 1,200 square feet that they're starting with.
Right.
Does the city know of builders that are building those type of units, especially since there is such a draw for this right now?
That's been an issue, and that's one of the after effects of the recession, is we took away a lot of the sort of the builders who were in between that would be able to do that. They would be small enough, be flexible enough, all these other things. What we've been left with after the recession is that whole group is gone now. They just couldn't outlast the recession. So we've got the big builders who are, let's build the maximum size to fit for whether it's housing or multifamily or single family. And then we've got a group that is very focused on the emergency housing, homeless side of things, but not much of anything in between locally. Unless, of course, of builders who are more willing to send our way. I'd be happy to have them.
Commissioner Paulson, go ahead.
What I've noticed is that a lot of the smaller jurisdictions that have lower fees are seeing more of those lower income, smaller developers coming back. Still kind of struggling with the ADU thing. But what I've seen is that these developers are coming to the smaller jurisdictions and asking about how can we build single family residences and have all of the ADUs and all of this stuff. For a lot of smaller jurisdictions don't have to do the, the 2 ADU thing. So it seems to me like it's more of they're trying to not run into all of the fees that some of the larger jurisdictions have. And that might be a way to, like, because you already talked about the fact that you guys kind of like waived fees in some areas and stuff like that, but a lot of these developers don't go out of their way to like contact the cities unless they absolutely have to.
Well, that's what I was getting at, is there an incentive for saying, come build a smaller apartment unit with smaller apartments? And I know that, as we were going through the middle housing segment, we weren't talking about building large apartment complexes and everything else. However, building, smaller looking units and incentivizing that and trying to kind of ring the bell of come our ways and build these, we'd love to have you in that situation. Because I'm sure there's builders out there that would say, yeah, if I can build a 650 square foot unit, basically I'm building my 1,300 square foot, but I'm split it into smaller portions, and I can charge $1,500 a month. And you have $3,000 a month in the same space. So I don't know if other cities in our area are doing that, or if it is something we can try, and maybe there's builders up in Tacoma area that we could kind of say, come on down here, we're ready.
Yeah, and I think that's obviously it's a good implementation action or part of that process. It's also identifying resources on our end to do that kind of work. I mean, on one part, we've got the ADU plans as sort of a little bit creeping in that direction, ongoing conversations with the OMB and so forth, and what can we do better kind of things. But we haven't really been able to spend the time marketing ourselves.
Like, is there a convention that you can go to for building, like apartment, middle housing?
Oh,
builder
I'm sure.
convention? Come on down.
There definitely are places to do that, but that requires the staff level and the time to be able
I
to.
get some volunteers from the commission to go up to those.
I'm more than happy to volunteer commissioners to do that.
Yeah.
Find them.
Go ahead, Commissioner Paulson.
Has the city considered, and this may have been discussed prior to me being appointed, but has the city considered like handling some of like the environmental reports or considerations for some of the other historic buildings and you know, places near the river, things like, you know, places that developers notoriously try to shy away from, because when you talk about environment and like historic stuff, they kind of like, oh, I don't want to be involved in that. If we handle that prior to them, like having to, or for them, I guess, has that been discussed at all?
Yeah, that has definitely been on the table. One, whether we're doing a SEPA planned action for a particular area or other things to try to address a lot of those issues ahead of time, you know, either set the mitigation ahead of time for traffic and deal with the environmental issues and all those kinds of things. The only time that we've been able to do that in the recent past is for the historic property, brewery property. We did a full planned unit, planned action, SEPA for that. And there's so many challenges with that particular site. I don't think I can really say it's a failure, but it's a very challenging site, even if you've done a planned action, to try to do something new. What we're looking at right now is for both of the new old brewery on the Custard and that area, that property is currently, we're working through brownfield grant. Start that, it's the first brownfield grant to sort of identify all the problems and to set us up for the next brownfield grant, which is the actual cleanup. The thought is that actual cleanup will give us a leg up on, okay, now let's talk about doing a planned action SEPA. That's something the city administrator said she wants to be looking at doing. We've got a few steps on the brownfield to get done, but I think that's probably the best mechanism for the brewery redevelopment itself to happen. I mean, to help it happen, because you've got the shoreline issues, you've got the cultural issues, you've got all those things that are hurdles for anybody who, unless they've got gigantic dollars to come in and do something. We're also looking at a similar thing with the WashDOT property, the 10 acres on the north, near Prosper on Capitol Boulevard, redeveloping that site in a similar fashion. So those are two kind of examples that were several-year plans that were done a few years ago about here's some targeted things that we could do. We haven't really started to explore beyond those particular items, what other things that we could be doing. So, but I think it's on the table in terms of if it makes it easier to develop, yes. But then we've got to figure out how we're gonna pay for it, what's the scope of it and all these other things that I don't think we've done the scoping to that level outside of those areas yet.
Commissioner Kirkpatrick.
What's gonna happen to the motels that are sitting empty on Tumwater Boulevard?
I don't know.
Apparently can't be used where they are, is that the bottom line? They decided since they're on airport property, they can't be used for permanent support?
No, yeah, it's out because of the FAA issues unless we are willing to spend time dealing with the FAA to try to get those out of the
That's one of your wish lists.
oh, yeah, it's
Housing, and those are sitting right there.
and like the Housing Authority pursued them and we were in discussions with the board about the process and we got so wrapped around the wheel about talking about the process could look like that it killed the project. So, yeah, it's sort of like, those would be nice ideas if we were in a perfect world, but does it make sense for us to put our effort into those? Or like what has happened for the Tumwater Inn project on Capitol, where we've actually been able to set it up so the Housing Authority is doing the cleanup, doing the rehab for senior housing, look for other opportunities besides.
It just seems odd that 30 years those buildings were full most nights with people.
Mhm.
What difference does it make?
Yeah.
They were, nobody said that they couldn't, use them for a regular motel, which probably affected more people than they used it for permanent support housing.
We don't deal with logic when we deal with some of the larger federal agencies, so.
Some things that I see out there.
Lost opportunity. Maybe it's not gone altogether. Are we ready to move on
I
to?
think that pretty much covers, if you have any questions when you look through the memo or any of those things, let me know. We'll be coming back to bits and pieces of that as we get into the update itself.
Ready to move on to the development code amendments or administration amendments?
Yes. Because of being on vacation and then deciding to get sick for a little bit, I'm obviously well prepared to talk about the development code amendments because I literally just reopened them today. And my God, there's a lot of work there.
Are you really ready? Do you want to?
No, I think it's important. I give you a sort of, maybe I'm a little concerned I'll drive everybody away. So Brandon, before you leave, if you want to commit to talking to some builders about, smaller projects, that would be great. Melissa, I know you're already on that. Harry, if you deal with the FAA, Elizabeth, I'm not sure. Whatever you feel like.
I don't have any strings at WashDOT anymore, so you can't do that.
Sounds good.
Another piece of state legislation that we're dealing with that came through in 23 is 5290, Senate Bill 5290. What that did is change how the permitting review process and the expectations that come from that. There are two large components to that. Number one is the setting of a shot clock, more advanced shot clock for permit review times. For projects that come in, applications that come in for permitting, we have a set amount of time in which we have to review those applications and render a decision. For all of those projects, and some of this came out in 1996, and we're sort of building on all of that work back then, which I hate to say I was part of then, so I'm really excited to be about it again. The process typically for a permit that comes in, if you're building something besides a regular house, a single-family house, if you're building a multifamily development, a commercial development, or industrial development, of any size, you'll typically need a land use approval tied with your building permit and your site plan approval and all that. Those processes are what we're talking about when we're talking about the development review process update. When we get those applications in, typically we go through a determination of completeness process, which is after doing feasibility and pre-applications with the applicant, to sort of talk through what they're proposing to do, say what does and doesn't work under the current code and all these kinds of things. Application package is submitted by the applicant. And we have a whole series of checklists of items that are required for all of our applications. It's everything from what needs to be on the site plan. Do you need a traffic study? Do you need critical area studies? All these other things are included in that checklist. If an applicant has all those materials in order, within 28 days of getting an application, we have to say it's complete and ready for review. So that's timeline number one. If it are not complete, we can have the ability to, quote unquote, stop the clock, request information, and then we have a shorter amount of time to review the next submittal. One of the hiccups that we're dealing with on our system is, number one, which was a great advantage when COVID hit, was we went entirely to electronic submittals, which meant that people can just submit all their paperwork online, didn't have to come in person to do that. We're not well developed enough to say the instant that they press submit that we have everything that we need in that application. We actually have to go pull that out, do the review and all that. So having the ability to look at a plan set and everything across the counter before it comes in is a great way to say, no, this napkin you drew on is not enough, you need more information. Rather than it comes in, sits in our cloud, we've got 3 or 4 days to route it, have somebody look at it and say, this doesn't work, period. You know, so it just adds confusion and time to the process. Once an application is complete, depending upon how much other complicated review is required, we have a set number of days we have to turn projects around. Forgive me if I don't remember the days properly. I believe the bottom end is 60 days. So what that is if we get a application, say, for a small multifamily project that doesn't require environmental review, doesn't have critical areas, doesn't have anything like that, we have 60 days to review everything that has been submitted and then issue our decision, which is fine, except when we start to get into things like construction documents and grading and fill and everything else, which takes time because we've got stormwater requirements from the state to meet. We've got all these other things that are just pretty damn complicated. So we're currently working on the process to, first of all, say how we're going to do this, what things we can and cannot do, and we do have the ability under the legislation to say we can't do this. It's just not possible. Staffing even with full staffing and everything else, we can't do this. Turn it around. So we're looking at realistic timeframes that still, turn things around in a proper fashion because we do want to see things built. We're not in a let's stop development and drag things out mode here, but we just have to be realistic in terms of what we can do and can't do. So that's the level one of the permitting. The level two is any of those smaller projects that require some level of environmental review, but don't require a hearing examiner approval. It's administrative approval. So staff can look at it, say everything works here, issue the decision without doing anything else. Level 3 approvals are a little bit more complicated. Those are things like our shoreline permits, conditional use permits, variance applications, flats, all those kinds of things. Those are things that require, in addition to the full environmental review, they also typically require a hearing examiner approval, which adds time because that 170 days, I believe, that's allocated for that, according to the state, also includes all the time for staff to review the application, prepare the staff report, schedule a hearing examiner holds their hearing, and issues their decision. Now, our code says we expect a decision back from the hearing examiner 10 days after the hearing. Earlier this year, we were 6 months out in getting decisions back from the hearing examiner. The issue is, it's one thing to have timelines and say that, if you don't meet it, bad on you, but now added as part of the legislation is a requirement that we refund application fees if we don't hit the timelines. So that's 10 or 20% of the total fees that have come across, and then so that's a whole another process of somebody having to do that, minus the fact that you're taking away the money that was funding the review in the first place. So we're in the process right now of sort of redoing our entire Title 14, which is our development review process code. It really hadn't been updated very much since '96. There are some things that I could not understand. And I have done development review for multiple jurisdictions in the past, and I couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. Which is a great way to start. Because when I asked our permit staff is, yeah, you're right, I don't quite understand that either, but we had, they don't have a choice. They have to get something done, and they just did workarounds. So we're trying to figure out, number one, what we have, and then turn around and develop a new code. So we have until January 1st of '25 to get a new code in place.
Okay.
Otherwise, all the state requirements that are written into the RCW are effective in the city. So either we do it ourselves or they do it for us. So we'll be bringing an ordinance to you probably the second meeting in October that covers all the changes that we're going to be proposing. I want to say right now it's about 80 pages. It touches almost every title in the code. So it will require a bit of explanation and working through to try to get through the process. So I'm just sort of prepping you for that.
It looks like on our schedule, I don't know if it's the same things, but we have some work sessions for both October 8th and October 22nd. Is that, and then we would go into sometime later a public hearing on that to.
Yeah, so public hearing probably first meeting in November. As we're still developing the ordinance and it has not gone through legal review yet, I don't think I'm ready to bring you the actual ordinance until legal review is what we've got. But what I can do is bring you bits and pieces for the meeting on the 8th to sort of walk you through. This is kind of the structure we've got. These are the issues that we're dealing with in a little bit more detail, sort of the flow chart of all the things that we're looking at. And here's some code examples that will probably be in the ordinance of how we're going to be dealing with that. So at least you can get a start going through and thinking through some of the process and thinking through whether the code language itself makes sense to you as a person who doesn't do this. That's the important thing for me, is to show you, this is what we're thinking and this is what we think it means. What do you think? And it's like, if you say, no, that means the house is supposed to be red when we think it's blue, we've got a lot of work. But I think there's enough meat, there's going to be enough meat to get you something next week, in the packet next week to look at.
And are you looking at like streamlining even more? Because from '96 to now, there's a lot of tools that are probably out there for this, and a lot of other examples in other municipalities.
Yeah, we are leaning on a lot of the stuff that I've had experience with that I think works well. We are trying to streamline what we can. There are things that I just don't think we have the time to streamline as well as I would like to. And I'm saying that we're going to do it again next year, but we might tweak it a little bit next year if it doesn't work. But we're going to, meet the intent of the state law by the end of the year.
You did then have a revision. I like that plan.
Now, the good news is everybody else is in the same boat. And everybody else at the planning directors conference earlier this month there was some crying. We had counselors on site, so that helped a lot. There were some who were so far ahead, but they're like Redmond and Bellevue, and they've got staffs of 20, and it's like, yeah, sure, you're done, great.
Just walking with the document.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say, all right, start fresh.
I brought my draft with me, to the conference to work on, so.
Well, we had the benefit when we, in October or later, to, either through staff outreach to the development community to find out if they think it's gonna work, and
Yeah, we're gonna have a very abbreviated version of that, because that's not, we don't have the time to do a full bore outreach. I think, really, we're actually gonna be focusing a lot more on the housing side. Back in April, we had April and May, we had a series of meetings with individual stakeholders on the housing side, from the developers to the service providers, a whole range of folks. And so our idea is to schedule a follow-up meetings with them in October, November, to start talking about what we've developed and what we have now for the housing side to get their input. So really, that's probably gonna be our focus on the staff side. We're just not gonna probably have the capacity to do much more on that.
hopefully they'll show up. Are we pretty much in sync with the other area jurisdictions with the kinds of timing that?
We were ahead, and then I dropped the ball, and now we're behind. Thurston County is now in the lead, and I'm really embarrassed. Yes, I know, I feel the same way. They're like producing stuff left and right, and Olympia's not far behind. Lacey and us are about in the same position, because we have about the same number of staff.
To do to?
Yeah.
I would think that would, if they're kind of more or less in sync, then the builder community, developer community kind of has an idea what to expect in our region, and doesn't have to go, do a lot of specialized work.
Yeah, and I don't think, there's not gonna be, because of the detail of the state requirements, there's not gonna be a huge amount of difference overall between the jurisdictions, like, we're not dramatically changed. I think that the things that are gonna be different are on the implementation side. What we reasonably think we can do and where we wanna put our emphasis will probably be different than some of the other jurisdictions, but that'll be part of the, So, I don't want to ask this question, but I have to. Are you coming back next month?
Yes.
Okay. Now I can,
Get me off.
I don't have to get yelled at by Erica when she gets back. What did you do? You lost the entire place? Fine when I left.
Anything to add or talk about a little more? We're going to be hearing a lot more about this. Okay. Looks like our next meeting on the 8th will include this, but also Transit 101.
Yep.
On how transit works.
Yep, I'll be following Inner City Transit to make sure that they're,
Oh, cool. Very good. Great. Any further discussion or motion for the evening?
A motion to adjourn?
Second. Okay, that was a motion from Commissioner Staff and a second from Commissioner Paulson to adjourn tonight. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
That
Thank
permit review though.
Night, Grace.
thank you.
Good night, Grace.